Hey, this is Joel Duff. Welcome back to the channel. Whether you're new, whether you've been here many times, I have a little bit of a different topic today. I want to talk about something that sits right at the heart of modern science, and that is the peer review process. It's a system we rely on to check ideas, challenge conclusions, make sure research stands up to scrutiny before it enters into what we'd call the permanent record of science. Now, I've been through the process many times myself. I've published more than 50 peer-reviewed articles in journals, and I've seen firsthand the strengths and the weaknesses of this process. And it isn't perfect, right? Scientists often debate how well it's working. And there's a lot of discussion these days about peer review, whether it's too slow, is it too biased, is it too closed door? So now here's the twist. Instead of just rambling on about my experiences and my own thoughts on this process, my own critique, I'm going to use an article you see here behind me, written by a creationist critic of science and peer review, or their thoughts on peer review themselves, because creation scientists have what they call peer-reviewed journals, and we want to, by looking at what they do for peer review and how it works and doesn't work there, I think we can learn something about the scientific peer review process. Sometimes looking at an outsider's critique, especially one that comes from a place where I, specifically disagree and strongly disagree with, it can still highlight some really significant and important issues that might be worth talking about, that I do think are worth talking about, especially in this article that I'm going to share with you. I definitely don't agree with the conclusions of this author about origins questions, but I do think this particular author's thoughts and arguments about peer review give us a really provocative entry point for asking, how does peer review really function? Where does it succeed? Where does it fail? How should Christians, scientists, and the broader public think about this process we call peer review? All right, so let's get started. We're going to look at, I'm just going to read portions of an article that has come out in a new journal, a new creationist journal called New Creation Studies. This is volume 1, issue 1. This is article number 1 on page number 1 of this brand new journal just released in the past month. And it's an editorial. Do we need another creationist journal? By Todd Wood from the Core Academy of Science. All right, to get started, maybe a word quickly about Todd Wood. He is a PhD biochemist, been writing about young earth creationism and runs his own creation science organization, Core Academy of Science, for quite a number of years now. He has published a bunch of papers in creation science journals, and has been an editor and reviewer, as you're going to see in those journals. And he is the editor, one of the editors of this particular new journal. Yeah, I'm going to read selected portions of this. It's only 4 pages long, so we'll hit most of the highlights here. Years ago, I found myself embroiled in a heated editorial controversy in which I felt strongly threatened the integrity of creationist publishing. These many years later, the details of our dispute seem much less important, but I can viscerally recall how angry I was when my objections were ignored. After losing that fight, I wrote a paper arguing for the Christian basis of double-blind peer review, the form in which authors and reviewers are unknown to each other. I sent it to a few others who agreed with my perspective, and they suggested modifications and agreed to join as co-authors. We published it in the inaugural volume of Answers Research Journal. Answers Research Journal is the peer-reviewed journal of Answers in Genesis. In the very first volume, he had a paper that was about the need for this form of peer review. As he points out here, Google Scholar tells me it's been cited 1 time, which is perhaps more than it deserves, as he says. I look at that paper with a bit of chagrin. Not exactly regret, but certainly closer to embarrassment than pride. The paper isn't bad per se, but it's still not very good either. The argument put forth is, unfortunately, a common exercise in using the Bible to justify current practice rather than allowing the Word of God to challenge those practices at every level. This is an important point, by the way. What he's saying is something that happens a lot. You have a particular thing you think is right. Okay, this is the way we should do things. And then you go get your Bible and say, well, as a Christian, I want to defend this particular view I have, as the biblical view. And so, but you've already decided it's the biblical view, right? And then you go and you find something in the Bible or some, explanatory framework that allows you to say, like, this is the way we should be treating each other, or this is the best approach. I'm not really sure what, how much the Bible really says about peer review, or it can be inferred to talk about some principles that you could use. I mean, that's the idea, generating some principles of behavior that we would apply to peer review. But his point is sort of like, you already kind of feel like, hey, I know how it should be done. Let's find some principles that I can apply from the Bible. So it makes it sound like biblical peer review. Rather than allowing God to challenge the practices. In other words, understanding principles first and then applying it to like, well, how should we best, vet each other's work and ideas? Given the circumstances and my attitude at the time, I do not think I could have imagined much beyond what I wrote in the paper. So perhaps the intervening years of maturity and growth were necessary to bring me to the ideas I describe here. All right, so this is, what have I learned over, the many years, the 3 decades of experience that he has publishing as an author, reviewer, and editor? My reviews have been accepted. Others have been ignored. I've received dozens, maybe hundreds of reviews of my own work. Some of the suggestions have been helpful and others have been aggravating and nitpicky. By the way, I've experienced all these things myself, right? Some reviews are awesome. Catch things that I didn't catch and I should have caught. Other things are misunderstandings of my work. That might be because I'm not expressing myself properly, but in many cases, it's just like they didn't pay enough attention, didn't understand the work. Some papers, are sometimes it's very aggravating, the differences between reviewers, and then the overall decision can be very aggravating. Some suggestions have been very helpful. Oh, some of my papers were published with nearly no changes requested at all. Frankly, that leaves me very uneasy, as I think it should. I mean, it's very, I think a good peer review process is always going to find some refinement that you yourself didn't see. And so should be making things better. And so it tends to make you feel like it's kind of sloppy, like somebody's just in a hurry. It's kind of like, this is good enough. And then things get passed through. And that reduces the quality of our overall output. Other papers were rejected for reasons I still think were unreasonable. Throughout my experience in scholarly publishing, I also watched the internet completely transform the publication process. Absolutely. I mean, from the beginning, when as he's going to say here, at first you had to print out a whole bunch of copies of your paper, put them in snail mail, send them off to an editor. They would have to think about who they were going to send them to, or basically send mail to individuals asking whether they're willing to review something, or maybe just ship them out to a bunch of people they thought would review them, hoping that some of them would review it and send back their review. Now, even in the last 30 years, there's still email, but just even before that, just before my time, it would have been all on paper, even the correspondences. And so, it's a laborious process, which takes a long period of time. Months, and even years at times to get through that whole process, especially if you're going to have multiple back and forths with the editor and the reviewers. Today, of course, we can just ship off an electronic copy and everybody, all the reviewers get all the things they need to be able to see. The timeline is much shorter. Amidst these changes, the core experience remains the same. Typically, right, blind peer review, at least in the sense of not knowing who the reviewers are. I, who submit the article, don't know who reviewed it, right? So I get anonymous. I get reviewer 1, reviewer 2, and maybe reviewer 3, and potentially sometimes reviewer number 4. And I just get sent their comments. And the overall editor is sort of assessing the quality of the reviews themselves, especially if there's disagreements about the reviewers. Oh, this is the best paper I've ever read. You should publish it right away. Another one's like, this is terrible. It really needs massive revisions. Which one is it? That's where the editor has a lot of power. And so there's a lot of give and take, a lot of unknowns in terms of like how the process is proceeding and who's really making the decisions. The peer review process I wanted to defend in 2008, now 17 years later, I seriously suspect might not be worth saving. Now, what he's talking about there is in terms of the peer review process and this blind peer review is something that's been discussed a lot, among scientists, among journals and editors um, and sociologists and so forth, especially over the last 5 to 10 years. The model of peer review he described in 2008 works well as long as everybody involved understands the system exactly the same, right? You have to respect the process. You have to put in the effort. You have to be a conscientious reviewer. Even when somebody disagrees, you have to agree on the basic criteria of what makes a good paper. And of course, the reality is that none of these things are really completely realistic. Different people have different standards, no matter what the editor might write about what the standards are. What constitutes a good paper? How much data do you need? How thorough do you need to have the statistics and so forth? There's all kinds of issues there. And then there is the whole part of human nature, all right? Our human nature that, maybe knows the field and has biases about what we'd like to see published or not published, or feels like certain ideas are unfavorable, or we're not particularly inclined to a particular viewpoint, so we might be skeptical of it. Rather than just allowing the data to speak for itself and allowing somebody to use data to try to make their point. So and this is what Todd Wood is really, I think, upset about and feels is problematic, at least within the young earth creationist world. And I think he would say that it's probably true for many other journals as well. The actual blind peer review process, the anonymity of it all, can become problematic. As he says, it's the cloak of anonymity that allows us to speak the truth without fear of reprisal. Right? We can speak the truth. We don't have to worry about hurting, that person's, we don't have to worry about reprisal from that particular person. When I try to submit my own paper, they'll be upset that I rejected theirs, and they'll just reject mine out of hand. The truth delivered is in such a way is often ungracious and cruel. The problem with anonymity is also maybe that you're a little bit too honest. All right. You have axes to grind, and you can grind them a little stronger, when you're an anonymous reviewer, the infamous reviewer number 2. Delivery of these reviews by impersonal email only compounds the problem, creating too much opportunity for misunderstanding. Anger is far too common, and that anger is covered up rather than resolved by the anonymous process. You never really get to confront your reviewer in a way. I mean, you get to write a rebuttal and say why that reviewer is wrong, and then you always are in this position of like, well, here's what I'd really like to say to that reviewer, but I also can't make them too upset, or they might continue to poorly review my article and it might never get accepted. And that's where you get into negotiations with the editor and so forth. It's a human process as much as we're trying to be as neutral as we're trying to make it. And that's the thing. Underlying the whole idea is the understanding we know that people are people, all right? We know that, we all know that we have biases. We all know that we have biases, and then we have particular people we might not like, or we dislike. We personally might dislike somebody in the field, and that could be held against us. So sometimes the paper itself is anonymous that the person's reviewing. Sometimes it's a double-blind process. Double-blind would be, I don't know who wrote this paper that I'm reading, and they're not going to know who's reviewing it. And that should allow you to be as honest as you possibly can. Now, of course, there are many specialists, subfields, which are so specialized that if you know the discipline well, you kind of know who wrote the paper, because that's what they're studying. And that's you just know, right? Without saying. And also you might know who did the reviews. And that's the case with me fairly recently. I'm pretty sure I know who reviewed the last paper that I submitted. And I had several really strongly worded, I think polite, but very strongly worded responses to my article, my paper. All of which were completely right. Right? I was missing some big things in a very ambitious paper that I put together. And so I appreciate that. I didn't feel good about it because I felt really bad for having missed some things and made some pretty significant mistakes. And I needed to clean up some things a lot. And so, but that's kind of the point of the peer review process, right? If I just had an editor in a journal in which I'm just going to pay to play, right? Which means, there's an editor, but it's sort of like, yeah, we want to accept as many articles as we can because, we're going to make thousands of dollars on each one. Then that's also presents something of a bias, right? That lowers the quality potentially of the journal because you're not maybe being thoroughly vetted, because there is an incentive to thoroughly vet, the articles that go into that particular journal. In this case, there are editors and reviewers that are very conscientious about whatever they're given. And they are trying to make those articles as good as they can be so that the journal can be as respected as possible, so that it can have a certain cachet, so that people know when they read that journal, it's been vetted by experts. Many people have looked at it. It's gone through the ringer. And I've submitted to this journal before and gone through 2 rounds of review. And I can tell you the final product, which was published, is far superior to my original manuscript. Even though I might have been fairly proud and happy with that manuscript, I knew how much work I put into it. And then, I got to do this more work. I got to satisfy somebody by, doing more research in this particular area and adding more detail here and so forth. And then at the end, when you're done, you're like, yes, you're right. All of this makes this much better and more valuable to the community. But I digress. Todd Wood here is talking about the thing with anonymity is that although it is, and I'm not sure how much I agree with him on this. And, I've seen different sides of this, even in my own work and with my other colleagues. I think what he's saying is that there is too many problems with the blind process with respect to how people, treat each other. And we're looking for, especially since he's saying we're a Christian like publisher. And the problem with creation science journals is we all agree that we're Christians and we should have a certain behavior toward one another. And yet the whole cover of anonymity allows other Christians to behave in ways and say things that they would never really on a personal level say. They would respect that person and they should be trying to work with them and even point out their errors, but point out their errors in a loving way. And the anonymity tends to result in a non-loving, review. Which is already a problem within young earth creationism in terms of how different young earth creationists treat each other. There's a lot of angst within that community because of the rancor that has existed over the last few years. And if you want to know what I'm talking about, look at my last video in which we read another article, the second article from this particular journal, about the state of creationism and different areas that need to be fixed within young earth creationism from a young earth creationist perspective. It's a very introspective paper, and I cover that very thoroughly in my last video. Anger is far too common, and that anger is covered up rather than resolved by the anonymous process, right? When you're upset and you think somebody has wronged you, and yet it's anonymous, there is no way to ever have resolution to that. Whereas we would say from, Christians, if we disagree with somebody, there is a process that we should. It's not easy to do, but we are called to do the process of healing and actually having conversation and working out those differences. And if somebody has been wronged, actually having forgiveness given and asked for. Actually asked for and given. That's the second part of that process. Sometimes the anger is inevitable because the manuscript simply fails to be a good paper in any reasonable measure. Yes, and that's also part of the problem in the young earth creationist community is there are a lot of not so good scholars, trying to get published in creationist journals, sending in a bunch of crap. And even young earth creationists, who are editors have to deal with that kind of stuff. And it creates lots of angst. And because it's anonymous and there are certain a bunch of reviewers, I'm sure, in the young earth creationist community who see this stuff And I think they're very direct about just, how terrible it is. The most common outcome either is confrontation, argument, or appeal, and if that fails, sending the paper to some other outlet. Well, there's only so many outlets if you're in the young Earth creationist community. Now, if you're, you know, publishing in a secular journal and you didn't get into nature, and then you didn't get into science, and you didn't get into, PNAS, right? And then you didn't get into, current biology, right? And then you didn't get into cell, right? So you think you got this awesome stuff, and you just keep going down, you keep getting rejected. Eventually there's, PLOS One, or, other journals that publish a lot of stuff for a little bit higher fee. And eventually you'll probably find a journal that's willing to publish your stuff. But the respect level for that journal is also going down. And you have to weigh that, like, at some point, is it even worth publishing in some journals, where somebody might look at it, well, you published in that journal, I don't trust a lot of other things that are in that journal, and you're going to get tainted. Your paper will be tainted by the fact that there are other papers in there that others people look at and go, like, that hasn't been properly vetted, right? There's just, bad data, bad references, improper, statistics, you name it, lots of different problems that should have been caught in the peer review process. And so you might not want to lower yourself to that particular level of being in that particular journal for the sake of your own research and your own reputation. And so young Earth creationists, also have this, reviewers have to consider, like, we can't just let all this other stuff in. Otherwise, the papers that I'm trying to publish in that journal are also viewed with similar suspicion. Now, from an outsider looking at young Earth creationist journals, there's an awful lot of really bad stuff, just poorly written, poorly researched work in really all the journals that I see. Now, I mean, there are some articles that I think are good articles. I may disagree with the conclusions of them, but I think that they're well written, and the data collected seems to be reasonable, and so forth. And so, like, I would say, like, the data in it is fine. And I disagree with maybe the interpretation, how they're interpreting that particular data, because they come to a conclusion about a young Earth, or maybe an anti-evolution sort of, perspective on a same set of data that somebody else might interpret differently. The most common outcome, I already read that. This for me is the biggest shortcoming of the entire process. I could understand going through the hardship and struggle of peer review publishing if I knew the outcome would be respected good papers that would be published, and bad papers would disappear and not confuse and mislead the public. This is certainly not the world we live in. Now, he's talking to a young Earth creationist audience here, and I think that's mostly who he has in mind, because he has seen a whole bunch of really bad articles. And, part of his experience is being a reviewer for other journals, in which he has been a person who is, I'm sure, probably stood very fast on, like, do not publish this, do not publish this, do not publish this. This is not worthy of being published. And the frustration is then seeing it published. Right? As a reviewer, you say, like, absolutely not. Here's a whole list of problems. And then the paper comes out and it has all those same problems, and you've been ignored. And you're maybe more of an expert than the person that's writing the paper, in which case, in many cases, I would say that Todd Wood probably is. Probably more knowledgeable about many of the things that he's reading than some of the people that have written it. And so this is a problem, right? And this is not exclusive of young Earth creationist journals. This would be, in fact, something that happens across scientific fields. And the debate you could have with somebody is, like, how often does that happen? Like, how reliable are papers? And I would go back and I would say, like, there are journals that are more reliable than others, and there's metrics for reliability, or at least a reputation. And some might have reputations that no longer deserve those reputations, and eventually they will lose that reputation if they continue to have sloppy peer-reviewed and publish things that aren't vetted well. But he's right that there's a load of bad papers even in secular journals, right? There's a lot of journals out there that publish a bunch of complete junk. And there's many journals that will publish things. Well, there will be people that will try to publish things in areas that really, in journals that it really shouldn't be in. And so maybe they can't even find adequate reviewers to review that particular content. Or maybe there's, well, I do have one in mind. Actually, it's a creationist article in a secular publication, and it's in a like a microscopy journal. And really, the journal is just for like describing methods of microscopy. And so this creationist did do some microscopy and actually described the microscopic methods that they used and so forth. But of course, they come to some really radical conclusions about what they're seeing. But the journal reviewers probably didn't know anything about like the interpretation of the data itself in terms of the story they were trying to construct. They were simply looking at the methods because the journal is just basically about methods. And so they weren't really caring much about the other stuff. I think and I think many others would think that that's kind of a backwards way of getting your paper published, your ideas published. Here's my ideas. Like I have an agenda in which I want to try to show something that's a fairly controversial idea, and so I'll shove it into a methods paper. And so it doesn't get reviewed by the right types of reviewers that are going to catch and say to themselves, because, they don't know anything about that particular topic and they're just focused on the thing they know, which is like, hey, I'm interested in microscopy and I've been asked to review the microscopy of this paper. And maybe the editor isn't even really aware of the specific issues involved, as opposed to send it to a journal that's appropriate for the questions you're trying to answer or ask. And then they would find appropriate reviewers who could truly vet that particular material. So finding the right journal for the information is one way to make sure that you get the right reviewers to result in what you should be desiring, which is help me, make sure that I'm on the right, critique my work. And if you have a problem with it, I get to review, I get to write a rebuttal. And my rebuttal should be about, the data and the interpretation. This is the data I collected. This is a reasonable interpretation. You might not like my interpretation, but I can promote a particular interpretation as long as I have the data to back it up. The democracy of the power of the internet and social media has led to vast opportunities for people to express their opinions. No kidding. All right. So like everybody can write something now. And no one needs a journal article, especially in the world of creation research. Making an attractive video explaining your ideas will probably have a much greater public impact through social media than the audacious process of producing a technical paper that a handful of people will read and fewer will understand. It's like, that's exactly how it can feel. I'm going to spend an enormous amount of time on a paper that's going to be peer reviewed. Getting all the data right, the references, getting it all ready, put it in format, get it submitted, get reviews back, have to respond to the reviews, go through the whole process, right? Months and months of work, delays, eventually to see it published, right? And then only have a few people actually look at it. I mean, it's not going to be popular reading, right? And so anybody can get their ideas out there easily, much more easily, and get more eyeballs on them. Have the new realities of the internet and social media rendered peer review publication futile and irrelevant? That's a question people are asking. And my answer would be no. And Todd Wood's answer is also no. These frustrations had led me to reflect more deeply on scholarly publishing, especially in light of my Christian commitment and theology. The first question I want to know is what value scholarly publication actually brings. The truth is, I love a well-written scholarly paper. I love citations I can check. I love the methods that I can understand. I love following an articulate argument, even if I disagree with the conclusion. There's something beautiful and beneficial about knowing exactly what the evidence is, how it was studied, how it was being interpreted, right? All those things should be things that a good paper does, right, for you. Non-scholarly publications like press releases or social media posts, I can make any unsupported claim I like. Yeah, I mean, you can. On a blog, you can say whatever you want, and you can dredge up whatever data you want to try to support that, or just no data at all in many cases. But you can cherry pick some data that will make your arguments sound really good to the uninitiated and the non-expert. And it hasn't been reviewed, right? You haven't had, people critique it and make it better. You might not even be aware of your own, it's not like I'm purposely manipulating people with my bad information interpretation. It's just that you don't even understand the data well enough yourself. In a scholarly publication, I must support my statements. You have to support everything you say. That's the thing that gets critiqued the most. Like, okay, yeah, all right, you've got this data set, you're drawing conclusions from that, and then you go hog wild, making all kinds of other statements that really aren't supported by the information that you provided, by the data you provided. You got to have either citation, you have to appeal to somebody else who has data to support that particular assertion you made, or you have to appeal directly to your evidence. There's nowhere to hide bad reasoning or weak evidence. Even if such works can be understood by only a few, they can be understood with discipline and effort. A good paper, all right? Any person that has some training at all should be able to figure out what you've done and be able to analyze your arguments and understand them. We can identify where somebody might have gone wrong in their thinking. We can see where new evidence needs to be sought. We can see holes in or areas where I could improve upon their work by adding more data and then maybe re-examining their questions. We can trace citations to make sure past ideas have been represented correctly. On a blog, we sort of say, hey, so-and-so said this, or so-and-so believes exactly what I'm telling you they believe. Maybe you don't provide the citation and nobody looks it up. Right? A reviewer should be aware even of the citations and have knowledge of that literature and be thinking about whether you're appropriately citing that material, not simply making it look like you have evidence back there in those publications. In short, a good scholarly article is fruitful. It gives us a place to go and look for more evidence and data, where a non-scholarly publication leaves us wanting more detail and unable to verify or falsify its basic claims. The value is worth preserving. And published in a peer-reviewed journal, in a journal that will have a longer lifespan, a blog might disappear, but peer-reviewed journals are preserved and therefore more accessible over a long period of time and forms a basis of knowledge that many other people will be able to use in the future. The second value I want to preserve is the journal itself, effectively now a website that publishes scholarly articles. Journals have become shorthand or insignia for editorial practices and quality of publications. I want to be able to recognize a journal name and know that it means a paper is worth reading. We all know this function already happens, and it seems to me a practical time saver. I hear in my own field, there are certain journals where I know of stuff that's published there, it's probably really good. But I'm probably going to read material, and I'm not going to be ultra critical of it, or skeptical of it, I guess I should say. And there's other journals where you're kind of like, there could be some good stuff here, but I also don't have complete faith and trust that it's been properly reviewed, and therefore I'm going to have a little skepticism. And I'm probably more likely to cite something in a journal where I feel like the peer review process has been better done. I never recommend any publication or website unreservedly to anyone because I want people to think carefully and critically about everything they hear and see. But I will recommend some sites as more worthwhile and less prone to error than others. Right? I think about this all the time, just with how people cite stuff on social media without ever really thinking about the source that it comes from and whether it's reputable or not. They simply they think they agree with the result or what somebody's saying. But knowing that it comes from a reputable source, someplace that's been vetted by an editor at least, should give it more weight. Having a journal site with a convenient name that has a good reputation for quality publications is helpful in that regard. Not that we can trust what they publish, but that reading through the latest publications is worth your time, even if you disagree with the conclusions. That's another really good point. Even if you don't just have automatic trust in everything in those articles, like this is all the truth, this is all like what we should believe. It's like, but it's been vetted enough that you know that the idea is at least has some merit, that some people think it has merit. And so it should be worth your time to read, disagree or agree. The third value recognized in peer and scholarly peer review is the ability to improve scholarly work. At the most basic level, peer review can be seen as an opportunity to correct embarrassing mistakes before the paper is published. Yes, if my papers have been published on first round without much review at all, there'd be some pretty embarrassing errors in there. For a community supposedly dedicated to understanding the history of God's creation, we ought to welcome opportunities to expand our understanding even of our scholarly shortcomings. In our quest to understand God's creation, we ought to be motivated at every step by the question, how can we improve? I'm happy to say that I've experienced this in many different ways in my career. He's edited papers that have been submitted and they've been better once he's done the reviews. One could simply continue the course with blind peer review and hope to cultivate better authors. That's one approach to continuing with public. Now, see, the thing is, he has a problem with the current peer review process. It's just not working. And in young earth creationists, in creationism areas particularly, here's part of the issue with young earth creationism, is that there's only a handful of reviewers. I mean, if Nathaniel Jeanson puts something out on population genetics, or the mitochondrial genome, there's only like 3 people that can review that at all in the entire creationist community. And they probably don't get all 3 of those people to review it. Because there's so many disagreements, about in some creationist organizations. And so they don't even want to have input from some other creationist. So a lot of it's actually in-house or somebody they know really well. And often it's going to be maybe 3 reviews and only one of the reviewers actually has a chance of understanding and being able to critique the material that they're reading. And in many cases, there are many young earth creationists that have expertise in some particular area. They got their PhD in X, and there's nobody else in young earth creationism that has any expertise in that same area. It'll be very peripheral to it. And so you're getting 3 reviewers who really don't know that material. So, and they're spread really thin. There's multiple different journals. There's only so many reviewers to go along. And if they're not all really diligent and doing a lot of reviews, it's probably very difficult to get reviews. I suspect there's a lot of papers that get published that are basically not reviewed. They're just reviewed by the editor of the journal itself. Okay, so, and this is also a problem that's cropping up in secular journals too, because there aren't any more faculty than there were 10 years ago, or professionals, but there are a whole lot more papers being submitted, especially in the age of AI, in which AI is helping to write papers, so they're being generated much quicker, and so we're just being flooded. I mean, editors, it's very hard to find people to be able to review articles that are experts in that particular area. And with layoffs, and there's not as many faculty really as there were before, because a lot of them are just teaching faculty, not research faculty. So they don't have any time on their hands and are being asked to teach an extra class. So they have less time for doing this type of service, because it is a service. They're not getting paid for it. It's just part of your professional duties. But when you have so many other things to do, that thing which is sort of in your extra time, and you don't have extra time, ends up being something you say like, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I don't have enough time. Or last year I reviewed 25, journal articles, and this year I'm cutting it back to 10. And if everybody's doing that, but there are twice as many articles being submitted, there's a lag right there, and there's a pressure, right, by editors to maybe like, well, if I get 1 review and it's positive, then we'll publish it. instead of like, we have to have 3, right? So that's another quality issue. And that is certainly a pressure, whether it's double blind peer review, or whether it's community review, or there's other forms of review now that occur. There's different models now. It's all a very stressed system. Now, I personally come down on the side of, I don't know really how to make it better. I know just getting rid of peer review is not the best alternative, because I can't imagine that being better. Peer review theoretically is a good thing, and leads to, for the reasons that Todd Wood has mentioned here, leads to better articles, and therefore better trust, among the community for what has been published. But it certainly has flaws. But as a flawed system, in order to replace it, I would rather replace it with something better than simply getting rid of something flawed simply because it's flawed and having a worse replacement for it. No replacement for it. Just editors. Like, I like this article, I don't like this article. With these values in mind, we can achieve them in some way that demonstrates the 2 greatest commandments, loving God and loving your neighbor. I suppose there's many ways to answer the question. One can simply continue the course with blind peer review and hope to cultivate better authors. He's saying, like, I don't think that's the way to go. We're not going to find better authors. We're kind of stuck with the ones we have now. I'm talking about young earth creationism now. We're kind of stuck with the reviewers we have now, which are a bunch of cranky people who tend to be pretty snide and dismissive in their anonymous reviews. And so we're not making any progress there in terms of building better community as a result. We all end up being skeptical of one another and angry, about how we're being treated. Reviewers and editors, but if we tried something really different and strange and uniquely Christian, well, what would be Christian? What if we tried to do peer review in a way that values our place in the community of Christ? What if we valued the Christian community as much as we value good scholarly publishing? We call our proposal community review. And so now here's where this particular journal is saying what Todd Wood is saying as an editor now and writing this intro to this new journal, saying we're trying something different, right? We're trying a new approach. I wouldn't say it's like 100% novel, but it's definitely a new element within the young earth creationist community. Community review. The first distinctive of this process is our intention to dispense with anonymity. When given a paper to review, the reviewers will know who wrote it. And when the reviews come in, the authors will know who wrote them as well. Now, of course, this solves some problems, but of course creates other problems, like the fear of reprisal, the fear of, they think I'm their friend, but I really don't like this paper and I don't want to offend them, but I have to, and maybe I'm not going to be as harsh as I would have been. But its point, of course, is you should only be harsh if it truly deserves to be corrected, not harsh because I just don't like this. And I'm trying to get it I don't want it published. I don't want that person to be published. No more hiding. If you need to say something negative about a paper, then you will have direct accountability for the way you say it, right? Maybe you'll learn to critique somebody. Maybe you'll learn to correct somebody with a heart from the right heart. And I think that's his idea of, like, this is a community of Christ. This is a community of people who love one another. We're all on the same page here. We're all trying to do the same thing in terms of supporting what we think is a Christian worldview perspective on how we understand science. And so therefore we should be all working to help each other in a loving way, not tearing each other down. And so we shouldn't need to have review that is anonymous, leading to our sinful natures coming out, right? And causing malpractice and deceit and incompetence. If you accuse somebody of incompetence, malpractice, or deception, you'll be held accountable, right? You're going to have to back it up. You can say, if you're incompetent, I need to show with evidence that you're incompetent. I need to, you know, provide my own citations on my own data, not simply say you're incompetent and say you shouldn't be published, you're incompetent. Thinking about this component more positively, everyone has value in Jesus Christ. He died for us all. And for those of us who are Christians, we know that we are created in Jesus Christ to walk in good works that God made us for, that God made for us. A simplistic, blunt editorial rejection might be adequate, but how much more powerful could it be to find ways to affirm authors, even if we have to admit their paper isn't very good? I always think about everyone as being a human being made in the image of God, how they'd want to be treated, and how we can help them, and how we can create community. This is what we do in a church, right? We have people from all different persuasions and walks of life and economic things, and we're all trying to understand one another. We all know that we have faults and sins and pride and all those things, but we are trying to all work in community with one another, build each other up, not simply be a competition, right? And a lot of scientific publishing ends up feeling like a competition. I'm trying to get there first, trying to get my name out there. I'm trying to like get credit for ideas. I'm trying to make sure somebody else doesn't really get credit, or I'm trying to get ahead or faster along the process of this research. It really isn't really that necessity in creation science, or there shouldn't be, but there definitely is competition for ideas. That brings me to the second distinctive of community review. We intend, as often as possible, to deliver reviews in person or by the next best means through teleconferencing. Right, now that's a pretty bold, this is a pretty bold suggestion, right? We're going to either try to actually meet you in person. We've got multiple editors, and maybe you're close to one of them. We want to sit down personal, like actual face-to-face, going through the rationale and decision we've made, because then we'll be accountable, you'll understand, and hopefully we'll be able to build you up through that. Or at least through teleconferencing, right? But that's still a direct confrontation, not like, hey, I just sent you an email and it's, I'm sorry, but your paper is crap and we don't want to hear from you anymore. We want to value authors and reviewers personally as human beings and neighbors that we should love. I've witnessed and experienced many hurt feelings over the years due to misreading or misunderstanding coldly worded assessments. But with the opportunity to directly interact with people, we will experience the love of Christ, even in the sensitive practice of peer review. Now, I know Todd Wood is not naive in that he knows that we're all sinners, and as much as we say this is what we'd like to do, and I think we agree, like this really is a good thing to do, right? And this, in theory, is exactly what should be done. It's still going to be really hard, and there's still going to be times that there are going to be people with hurt feelings and so forth. But he's saying if we can raise the bar and overall it can be better, we should always try to do what is best, even if it's going to be very, very hard, and it's not always going to be successful. Third, we have dispensed the editorial hierarchy and detailed procedures manual. Jesus chided the Gentiles for exercising tyrannical authority and encouraged us to follow and serve the community. Our editorial board will act together as a community that cares for its members and everyone who interacts with us, even as we seek to improve submissions, choose outstanding papers to publish, and, God willing, build a testimony for quality and excellence. We do not believe these goals are mutually exclusive. Rather, we anticipate the excellence will be born from pursuing Jesus' desire to build up the body of Christ. All right, so how can you be part of this community? Well, how do you submit to our journal? How are we going to get a paper published here? Submit a paper. Let's see what happens. We are not a closed community. We invite everyone everywhere to give it a try. Join us in this crazy experiment. Consider this a call for papers. And that brings me to the title question here at the conclusion of my essay. Do we need another creationist journal? The answer, I think, is an easy no. We have more than enough creationist journals. I mean, it's true. There's 4 or 5 creationist journals. Really, most of them don't have like a lot of publications. It's not like they're packed out and they're having trouble. Um, they have to turn so many away in order to just publish a certain number. No, there's some of them are pretty sparse. You know, they only got like 2 or 3 articles per issue, and maybe they only have an issue every quarter or every 6 months. There's a couple journals that have 10 or 15 articles. But overall, when you add it all up, it's not a lot of like peer reviewed scholarly publications in creation science journals. So it's not like there's this burgeoning need for adding another journal because there's so much demand. um, Community review, on the other hand, intrigues me enough to warrant a test run. So we offer to Jesus and the church this new journal, New Creation Studies, as the first journal to practice community review. Could this go terribly wrong? Certainly, but it might bear fruit that we cannot ever imagine at the moment. God only knows what will happen, but choosing a path that is deliberately Christian and intentionally obedient to the commands of Christ cannot be a complete disaster. It may not be successful, but probably that'll be our fault if it's not successful, even if we're doing what is probably the right thing to do. Ultimately, our success will be determined by our output. Absolutely. Will you find these articles to be quality works that advance our understanding of God's creation? That's the question at the end of the day. When I read the articles from the next issue, which there's only going to be one issue per year to start out with, so hopefully there's a decent number in there. When I look at those articles, how will I feel? Will I feel like these are higher quality than other creationist journals? And if I do, well, that would be a success, right? For young Earth creationists. Will participating in the editorial process build up the body of Christ? In this inaugural issue, we present 2 research articles, and he mentions the articles to present. I presume now in this community review is that you're going to submit articles, and they're going to put them out for people to review. And if you review them, you're going to have to say, who's reviewing them. There is in secular literature, there are places where you can put out your manuscript and you can get public reviews from those, and you can use those in order to try to improve that journal article, maybe before you submit it to another journal, or another journal might pick that up, having seen their reviews. So a much more open approach. Now, this is going to require that people are willing to do it. You still have to have reviewers, right? People have to be willing to review, and the more people that are willing to review that have at least some association with the content and know the content, then that itself is going to help the quality. But the real experiment here is whether knowing who they are and knowing and having this personal feedback in rejection or acceptance, how much does that make a difference in terms of improving the overall quality of creation science literature? I will be interested to find out whether this improves it. I happen to think it probably will. I'm looking forward to that issue. The articles that are in this first issue are already, I think, of a higher tier than most of the other journals. I don't know exactly how those were reviewed. Like, how did they do this first couple ones where they just invite articles that were reviewed by a few people to sort of get them going on the process? Like, it's hard to say. Or, I mean, maybe it says in the journal, maybe I haven't read close enough. And that would be my fault. Anyway, that is the welcome to New Creation Studies. We'll see what happens. Most of the articles I saw in this first one, I said, I'm interested in looking at those. Now, you might not be. I mean, many of you who are listening, if you're still listening, don't really have much of interest in creation science. I am, because I follow it and I critique it, so I'm interested in what they have to say. You might not be, but I hope maybe this was an interesting angle in terms of critiquing and thinking about peer review, is to actually think about, like, what are creation scientists doing? And I know there's a tendency to poo-poo peer review as like, oh, they're doing, I even put in air quotes, didn't I, when I talked about answers in Answers Research Journal from Answers in Genesis that it's peer reviewed. And I did that because to me, it looks like it's just editor reviewed. It looks like you send it to the editor and they go like, yeah, we like this. This looks good. Here's a few suggestions. And I don't think that's true peer review. Um, I think they do send some things out. They have in the past. I just think that they're running out of reviewers. And clearly, there's some pretty shoddy review because I see terrible articles. Oh, one other thing. I should have said this far earlier because, before all of you left. But I know non-Young Earth creationists that have been sent articles from Young Earth creationist journals for peer review, and which I think is a good practice. And I think that they should be doing that. I don't think it happens much anymore. And one of the things that's happened is I know from personally talking to a few people that they've been sent articles and they have written, they've done their due diligence and written a review and pointed out serious flaws. And they've been very disappointed to then get the Creation Science Journal and find out that those flaws were not fixed. All right. So it's one of the things where the journal's like, hey, our journals are peer reviewed and we've even sent them to those who are not creation scientists and gotten their reviews, as if that's helping them have more credibility for the articles that do get published. But if they're not actually taking any advice and they're not listening to those reviews at all, then that's false advertising. That's something that I think that that's another source of problems within Young Earth creationist publications. And so this particular journal is trying to say, we're open to, I'm hoping to be able to actually review a couple articles here. We'll see what happens. We'll see how much they follow through on this openness perspective. All right, this community review. All right, got to quit. That's it. Getting late, and it's getting long in the tooth on this particular episode of looking at creation science and talking about peer review. All right, thanks. Hey, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.